Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Ways morning briefing. I am your host, John McGinley, joined by Josh McCafferty again this morning. How are you doing this fine Friday, Josh?
Yeah, doing well, John. Thanks. We're almost about halfway through the international break now, thankfully. Celtic back next weekend, but we've got Scotland in action tonight, so not too bad.
Yeah, I'm the I'm just not a fan of international football in any respect, really. I like the big tournaments to an extent. I think I used to like them when I was younger more than I do now, and I just find international football at the moment a massive distraction. But listen, hello in the live chat. I'm seeing everyone coming in. Great to see you. And I do actually just want to start today just by saying thanks to everyone for the support that we've had over the last couple of weeks. There's been a lot more people on the live shows. There's been a lot more people viewing the videos, and we really appreciate it. So I just wanted to say, if you're a newcomer to this regular morning ritual of the Celtic Ways morning briefing, then you are very welcome along, and we love seeing you in the live chat as always. And of course, I appreciate all the regulars whose names I already recognise. So yeah, just wanted to let you know that you're fully appreciated, and we're going to be chatting through various bits of Celtic news and events going on at the moment. Obviously, there's still a lot of unrest around how the transfer window transpired, the exit from the Champions League, and we are going to cover all that. I think initially, Josh, I think we'll just cover, pressing news squad-wise in the sense of Anthony Ralston and Kieran Tierney pulled out of the Scotland squad. With more fitness concerns, it seems that Kieran Tierney had a scan when he entered the camp, and he ruled him out for both of Scotland's fixtures. Anthony Ralston, as we know, seems to be carrying a little bit of an injury at the moment. He was spotted taking painkillers during the Kairat Almaty game, I think. So he's playing with a knock as well. So Celtic's full-back options just getting a little bit weaker heading back against Kilmarnock next week.
Yeah, obviously Alistair Johnston's already out, so if Anthony Ralston's going to be out for a decent period, it leaves Colby Donovan there. He's with the Scotland under-21s now. They've got 2 games in the next couple of days, so you're just hoping he doesn't get an injury. And he's with the Scotland under-21s. Kieran Tierney is another concern. I think everyone knew when he was coming back to Celtic about his injury history and what the risk was in bringing him back. I'm led to believe it's not that significant an injury. Andy Robertson is on record last night saying he should be back for Scotland's October internationals. So it's not going to be a significant one. I don't think. If it is, he missed maybe 2-3 Celtic games. Obviously, even when they go back, Celtic have got Kilmarnock on a week on Sunday, then they've got another week till they play again against Partick Thistle, so it's not too bad. But yeah, it's not ideal. You've got Marcelo Sarachi there, who'll be building up his fitness during this period. Hayato Inamura is also there at the left back spot if needed for domestic games. So yeah, I think the left back spot is not that big of a concern. It's more the right back area, but I'd be really intrigued and excited to see if Colby Donovan got his chance there next weekend against Kilmarnock, or if Rodgers would maybe move Sarachi to right back if Tierney was fit. I'm not sure.
It seems like maybe Colby Donovan's introduction to the Celtic first team has maybe accelerated a little bit, Josh. Now, I think you were of the understanding that the view within Lennoxtown, the long term view is that he was going to be a potential future first teamer for Celtic, but the plan for him was obviously to go out on loan this season.
Yep.
But there's high hopes for Colby Donovan within Celtic, isn't there?
Yeah, there certainly is. He's very highly rated, and he's still only 18 years of age, so he's actually pretty young. He's a 2006. I believe when he was set to go out on loan to a Premiership club in Dundee, so that tells you a lot about what Celtic thought of him. It was going to be his first loan. He'd not even made a senior appearance for Celtic yet, and he was in Dundee ready to make the move. And Alistair Johnston gets injured against Kairat Almaty, and then Celtic have to bring him back. That's sometimes the wee bit of luck and the wee bit of fortune you need as a young player at Celtic to get your opportunity. A big injury happens to a first team player, and it's just about seizing that opportunity when you get it. And I think Colby's played once or twice now, made his debut against Livingston, then plays away in Kairat. I don't think he's done himself any harm with his performance particularly. In Kairat, he did pretty well, looks silky on the ball, which is what I've come to expect from watching him in youth games and stuff. And yeah, I hope he takes his opportunity. A lot of people within Lennoxtown see him as a future central defender, perhaps as well as a right back, just due to his ability on the ball. He's quite tall as well, so just have to see how his progression goes over the next couple of years. But I hope he gets that chance next weekend against Kilmarnock.
Yeah, like you say, you do need that little bit of luck. I think people people know the story of how Kieran Tierney broke into the setup under Ronnie Dyle. He was just a youth player at Lennoxtown and they needed bodies in training. They literally needed someone to perform a role rather than they weren't taking a look at Kieran Tierney at that point. He was just called up to kind of fill in because I think it was during an international break and they needed the numbers. And Kieran Tierney impressed in training, eventually broke through. Obviously, Colby Donovan's even a little bit further ahead than that. I would suggest there seems to be more of a plan for him, more of a long-term view of how he can impact Celtic. But listen, everyone, it's early days. I mean, I like the look of Colby Donovan too, but it's a big thing. It's a big difference between making an initial impact in a Celtic team and kind of being in and around the fringes and then playing consistently for Celtic. So massively long way to go. But like, we want more youths coming through, don't we, Josh? We talked about this earlier in the summer, and we said, you know, what represents success for kind of Celtic youths at the moment, and it is a young player coming in, and even if he only gets 2 or 3 games, just making the most of that opportunity.
Yeah, certainly, and it would be a positive step forward if he manages to get a couple of games a run in the team, perhaps. And you never know if Colby Donovan does well in these games, or if he gets the chance, then maybe he takes the second choice spot of Anthony Ralston. You never know how it's going to pan out. You've obviously got Dane Murray in there as well, who's been doing pretty well this season too. Obviously, his development's been a bit stunted by a lot of injuries, and he's not got as much experience as he probably should have for the age he is. So it's good to see him making the impact in the first team too. So yeah, it's positive on the whole, but like I say, sometimes you just need that lucky break, and that's what's happening with Colby at the minute. And it just shows, because I think a lot of positions Celtic have in the team where they're perhaps light, or they were light earlier this summer, out on the wings, for example, up front, there's not many big talents coming through there from the B team at the minute. The top guys like Colby, like Sean McCardle, Kyle Ure, Jude Bonner, and these players are more in the midfield and defence, and I think Celtic are pretty strong in those areas. So you just need that wee injury to maybe happen, and then you get your chance like Colby could.
Yeah, listen, everyone, I'm seeing all your comments in the chat. Fully appreciate it. I'm favouriting some so that I can bring them in later, especially the stuff around the club. We are going to be discussing that in depth very shortly. I was just starting off with the fullback news just to get it covered initially, but there is a question that's kind of arisen from that. Hazel saying, John, can you ask Josh his thoughts on Mitchell Frame being sold to Aberdeen? I was quite disappointed in that move. If you aren't aware of this, Mitchell Frame was sold to Aberdeen. I think it was for a fee of around £250,000 and a large sell-on fee, I believe. And yeah, he's now at Aberdeen. So I think he was once one of these players that was tipped to make some sort of first team impact at Celtic, but as can happen with the development of these players, that kind of fell away. I guess if he was going to get an opportunity, it would have been this season, given that there was no recognised backup for Kieran Tierney. But it just seems that Celtic, for whatever reason, Brendan Rodgers, for whatever reason, didn't think this guy quite cut the mustard for Celtic. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair comment. I think he started the first pre-season friendly of this season, along with Adam Montgomery on the left-hand side. He played that game away at Queen's Park. Not really seen since then. Made his first team debut, obviously, way back in 2023 under Rodgers against Feyenoord in that game in the Champions League. Yeah, not really been seen since. Development kind of stunted, but just playing continual B team football. He's not had a loan anywhere. And I think when the opportunity came along for Mitchell to go to Aberdeen, it was probably one that he wanted to take, just given his position in terms of what the manager thought of him, what the club thought of his development and things like that. So I think it's a good move for him. Aberdeen are putting a lot of money and putting a lot of time into investing in their young players and investing in young Scottish players to give them opportunities. And listen, I don't think Mitchell Frame would be going up to Aberdeen, putting pen to paper on a long-term contract without getting any guarantees of playing senior football. They're going to have a lot of games this season. They're playing Europe, so they're going to have Thursday, Sunday. They're going to need players to come in. They've been having makeshift people playing at left back. You know, Nicky Devlin played left wing back for them in the Scottish Cup final last season. Graham Shinney's played there, so he'll get chances. But on the whole, him leaving Celtic, I don't think it's one a lot of people are kind of disappointed or gutted about, just because I think his development's kind of been shunted since he kind of made his first team debut. But listen, you wish him all the best, and do you like to think he goes up to Aberdeen and does well?
Yeah, I did notice that he didn't make the Europa League squad, so I think he'll be playing Premiership football with them for a while. So just to underline that. What else is going on here within the chat? We might move on to other topics here. Jerry Smith's asking, is Tierney's injury bad? I don't think so, Jerry. I don't actually know, and I don't want to send panic stations out there with regard to whether Tierney's injured or fully injured, or whether this is just a precaution and that he's just, we know at the moment Tierney's fitness isn't quite where it needs to be, and Brendan Rodgers spoke about that after Ibrox in his post-match press conference, where he said it needs to get better after the international break. So I guess we just have to wait and see what the kind of update is. I know that he did go to the Scotland camp. It's not like he pulled out immediately, and then it was when he was at the Scotland camp he was assessed and determined that he couldn't play the 2 matches. My guess would be that if Tierney was fit, he would be desperate to play a World Cup qualification match, just given what he's kind of given to Scotland over the years. But yeah, just fingers crossed on Tierney, definitely, because we have Marcelo Sirache, but we're hoping that Tierney can kind of build up a head of steam. And I think the word Brendan Rodgers used is robustness, Josh. We want that robustness for him to be able to complete 90-minute matches, consistently, or maybe not even complete them, but he's just fallen away in the second half at the moment. I think that's what the problem is. If Celtic consistently get 60-70 minutes out of Kieran Tierney, as long as the full 70 minutes are good, that might be enough. But at the moment, it just seems there's, in the first half, he's shown what's required to an extent, although I don't think his performance at Ibrox was particularly strong. But then in the second half of matches, he's just fallen away completely, which is a shame at the moment.
Yeah, and especially when you get into the depths of October, November, December, when Celtic are playing a lot of football. The manager described it last season as an ultramarathon. You're going to need players like Kieran Tierney consistently being fit, consistently being available, and not just for a half of football, for more than that. Like the manager says, it's about building that up. 1 game a week at the minute you could argue both sides of that, whether it's a benefit or whether it's not really a benefit. But you're just hoping the injury isn't too bad. I mean, if Robertson is saying he should be back for the October internationals, that's probably a good sign. But we just have to really wait and see what the update is. Brendan Rodgers will speak next Friday. Steve Clarke will probably speak on the injuries pretty soon if he hasn't already. I've not really seen many comments from him floating about in the media before this Denmark game. But yeah, I think it's just a wait and see with Tierney at the minute.
Yeah, and we're expecting, I think Kasper Schmeichel will be a Celtic representative in tonight's Denmark-Scotland game. I was looking at some Danish media this week because obviously there's a fair bit of debate around Schmeichel at the moment, but I think the consensus is that he's going to continue in the Denmark goal as well, just in advance for the start of this World Cup qualification campaign anyway. As we know, he was injured on Denmark duty last season. That's where he picked up his shoulder injury, and there was a fair bit of debate about him in Danish media after that. Some out of order comments I think were made by a few pundits that didn't reflect well on those guys, but hopefully Kasper Schmeichel goes all good, and he also continues to kind of build into the season, and we see the best of him, because I think I've stated on many occasions, but Kasper Schmeichel was a difference maker for Celtic in Europe last season, and that's the Kasper Schmeichel we want for the coming season too. Right, everyone, we're going to obviously talk about what everyone's talking about, which is the continued silence from the Celtic board, from Michael Nicholson, from Peter Lawwell, from Desmond. We've covered this extensively on the channel over the last week or so. None of us are happy about it either. And it seems to be the consensus across the Celtic fan sphere. So there's close to 300 Celtic fan groups have put their name to this open letter that was sent to the Celtic board with 7 key questions that they feel the Celtic board has to answer at the moment. I'm going to read out the open letter in full, and then we're going to discuss it. It says, after a disastrous transfer window and failure to qualify for the Champions League, Celtic supporters are once again calling for urgent action to address the clear structural problems within the club. We demand full transparency from the board regarding its repeated failure to back the manager and reinvest our money into the playing squad. We also demand accountability. What course of action will be taken to ensure such a collective failure does not happen again? In addition, we highlight once more the club's lack of a coherent fan engagement strategy and call for a progressive, innovative approach to working with supporters. Our questions for Michael Nicholson, Chris Mackay, Peter Lawwell and Dermot Desmond are: what is the club's long-term footballing strategy, and when and how will this be communicated to supporters? Why has there been no investment in critical positions despite repeated pleas from the manager, obvious weaknesses in the squad and calls from supporters? What accountability measures are in place for repeated failures in transfer dealings? How do you intend to modernise the club's structure to compete in Europe? And why are we consistently unprepared for qualification stages? When will supporters receive the results of the fan survey conducted over a year ago? And why have these not yet been released despite being in the club's possession for several months? Why have the results of the Fairhurst inquiry not been made public? And what action will the club take to protect supporters from unlawful and disproportionate policing in the future? Why does the club continue to resist working with supporters to improve matchday atmosphere, supporter experience, and consultation on key issues such as ticket pricing and distribution? It has now been years since any form of meaningful communication between the Celtic board and supporters. For clarity, this means clear, open and transparent dialogue across the support and not confined to carefully selected representatives behind closed doors. Fans have repeatedly demanded positive engagement and repeatedly been ignored. The time for silence is over. So as I say, around 300 Celtic supporters groups, Celtic supporters clubs, fan groups, fan media, etc. have signed this open letter. It's a very interesting and worthy endeavour to try and get these answers from the Celtic board, in my personal opinion. I'm just going to take you back to the questions here and clear up a few things that people might be wondering about. For instance, the fan survey, as we know, you might have filled that out. Celtic sent out an email and invited supporters to fill out an extensive fan survey. I did it. I know a lot of people did it. And unfortunately, they've had the results of that for a long time, but they've never published them. And I think the expectation is when you conduct a fan survey to that extent, that you at least post a summary of the results and give an indication of what outcomes might have come from the survey. So I think that's an important question there amongst all the transfer stuff and strategy stuff. If you're wondering what the Fairhurst inquiry relates to, that is in relation to the policing of Celtic fans in the derby on 16th of March, where, you know, many Celtic fans were kind of held by police and unable to attend a fixture. Celtic themselves noted, you know, problems with that and concerns about that in the aftermath, and launched this independent inquiry by Fairhurst, but it's not been made public. I don't know if that's been completed or the results. I'm assuming this question from the Green Brigade, etc., indicates that they feel the results have been given back to the club, so they're just looking for some clarity on that. And yeah, and then there's the rest of the questions. You know, they speak for themselves, Josh. And this all speaks to this rising tide of expectation from the support that the board, probably Michael Nicholson as the club's chief executive, somehow communicate some of these answers to the wider Celtic support.
Yeah, I think it's when you put out a letter like that, you ask those questions like those in the number of groups that have signed it. I think it's impossible for the club to ignore it, really. It's really difficult for them to see this and just not say anything about it. I think it must be addressed before Celtic return to action against Kilmarnock next Sunday, or the feeling in the stands, displays in the stands, things that might happen. I think they risk that, so the club really need to respond. And like you say, I don't know if we expect anything to happen, if I'm being brutally honest, but they must respond. It's fair questions that are asked in this. It's not as if they're coming out and criticising the club directly and calling for the board to be sacked, calling for people to lose their jobs. They are simply asking a series of educated questions that are based off of evidence, you know. Even just simple things like the long-term footballing strategy, that I think a lot of modern clubs nowadays will communicate that with their supporters. Celtic need to move with the times, both in terms of their communication, both in terms of in their transfer dealings off the park as well. That's a very fair question as well. The second one, no investment in critical positions, despite repeated pleas from the manager. Brendan Rodgers has continually spoken. He wanted a replacement for Kyogo Furuhashi when he left in January. You could argue he's still not got a replacement for Kyogo Furuhashi? That's a completely fair question. In terms of modernise the club structure to compete in Europe, yeah, fair. Because they've failed in a number of European qualification campaigns over the past number of years. So yeah, it's even the fan survey one.
Yeah.
When
And
you
yeah,
conduct,
that's an example for me, Josh, of something that was really basic that the club have the power to deliver on.
yeah,
That would have avoided a question like this or repeated calls for this, because this isn't the first time that fans have asked, where is the fan survey, you know? And to me, to not even get a basic thing like that right just suggests that the Celtics, the club's stance towards fan engagement is just completely non-existent.
and it's not as if that there is anything in the fan survey, regardless of what the results of it are, that can be hidden or that look bad on the club. That's not the case. It's just simple questions about the matchday experience, what people want added to Celtic Park, what people brought in. And if you're asking that number of people questions, I'm not sure the exact numbers of however many people actually carried it out and completed it and filled in the form. But if you're asking that many people to fill in a survey, surely you put the results out. And I can't remember when that survey was brought out. That tells you how long ago it is. That I
Last
can't
summer,
remember.
I think it was maybe summer 2024, but it was I believe thousands
Yeah.
filled that out. So they had a pretty strong user base to kind of determine results from, and I really think they should be making the summary of that public as soon as possible. I guess at this stage, because it's been so long, like it's almost now embarrassing for them to release it because they've just held it back for so long. And then at what point does it become outdated too? Because there were issues in 2024, that are obviously continuing, but the fact that they've not released any of that. I mean, I wouldn't expect them to release every single bit of data from the survey. I don't think that's how these things work, but you can certainly put together a report and a summary that indicates the general feeling across some of the questions. And yeah, it's just, for me, these are pretty fundamental questions. I said on the weekly show that I did with Hamish the other day that I was looking for this kind of unified message from the wider support, and that it was important that it was measured and reasonable and not stuff that can be easily discounted. I think, as you said there, Josh, like they're not calling for anyone to be sacked. They're not saying sack the board, etc. And I think when it's a unified message that goes across different fan groups, now there'll be fan groups and Celtic supporters clubs within this 300 that feel like people should be sacked on the Celtic board. But I think when you're sending a broad unified message, it needs to be very reasonable and it needs to be something that can't be easily discounted. And I don't think this can be easily discounted to the point where common sense surely dictates that Celtic would address this. Now, I know common sense and Celtic haven't exactly gone hand in hand of late, but it's desperate stuff that if the club don't look to address any of this in the coming weeks and months, then they're really at risk, I think, of taking for granted another really big revenue tranche within the club. And this one has feelings, and it's the Celtic support. And if they continue to feel ignored off the back of everything that's happened this summer, then I just don't see how that is a viable relationship. At what point, Celtic consistently say we're the business side of Celtic is fantastic, but Celtic fans are not supporting a business; they're supporting a football team. They don't. Yeah, it's good that the club's in good financial health, but they're supporting a football team at the end of the day. They're not supporting a business. It's not the spreadsheet Olympics. This is something that fans feel passionately about, and as the kind of statement alludes to, a lot of the money that goes into Celtic is off the back of supporters. So I would hope that common sense prevails here, and there is some sort of engagement on these issues. I think there was rumours yesterday, Josh, that Michael Nicholson would be doing an interview, etc. I tried to shoot that down immediately because I knew it wasn't true. That isn't happening. Michael Nicholson isn't appearing on Sky Sports anytime soon. So don't be looking out for that, guys. I think Sky Sports were at Celtic Park yesterday for coverage of the women's team ahead of the women's team derby on Sunday. So yeah, Josh, I think at some point Celtic need to address this. We know that they'll release the financial results in a couple of weeks. That will come with a chairman's statement, but that is not enough, surely.
Yeah, I mean, supporters are the lifeblood of the club. You've got just under 60,000 people spending a lot of money on season tickets, going to games, supporting the team away from home. You have people coming over from Ireland every week. The least they deserve is when a statement like that goes out with a number of people that have signed it is a bit of communication and a bit of a response. from the club. And I think the Green Brigade and the North Curve deserve a lot of credit for this. They're a bit, so they get a lot of flack sometimes for some of the things they do and some of the things they say, but to lead something like this and set out those clear questions, I think they do deserve a lot of credit for that, because I think it's a very fair and reasonable statement and letter. So yeah, I'm just very intrigued to see if anything happens within the next 7 days regarding this.
Yeah, it's actually a skill to put together a message that over 300 groups will sign. Like you can't please everyone all of the time, and I think that whoever wrote that statement, I think absolutely nailed it. And I think we move forward now with, and I said the other day as well that I'm not naive. I don't think tangible change at Celtic is coming anytime soon. I just don't think that's how it works, just given the setup of the club and the way Desmond has control, etc. It's unrealistic to expect short-term change at Celtic in regard to what fans can do to affect that change. But what I was making clear the other day as well, that you need to have these conversations now out in public, and it needs to be consistently spoken about. And these questions are out there now, and if Celtic don't answer any of them, then they will consistently be spoken about. These questions will consistently come back, and people will be asking Celtic, why are you not addressing this? And I think that is fair enough. Just on the first point, on the first question, what is the club's long-term footballing strategy, and when and how will this be communicated to supporters? It's interesting. So I was trying to look back to see, exactly when Michael Nicholson, Peter Lawwell, etc. have been speaking. Most consistently, it comes in the video that the club release alongside the AGM. Now, I believe the AGM is not until in November this year, so we're a bit away from that. I looked at last year's video, and Peter Lawwell spoke about this supposed long-term football strategy, and Peter Lawwell said it's about developing Champions League players, it's about bringing in players who aren't quite Champions League level, and you develop them to that level, and that's all fair and good. But it sounded like an answer that Celtic would give 15 years ago. It didn't really sound like a cohesive strategy that sets out the clear objectives over the next 5 seasons or so. And so if the club's response to that is that we set out a footballing strategy every year at the AGM, again, that's not something I think is fit for purpose at the moment in this current sphere in 2025, when transparency is key, and there's people from clubs all over Scotland, England and Europe speaking about these issues publicly far more than Celtic do. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you were to ask anyone, any supporter, what they think the long-term footballing strategy is, for example, if you asked me, I would say that it's to buy cheap players, sell them on for a significant fee, and chance your arm at Champions League qualification and stay about 2 steps ahead of Rangers domestically. That's not a modern football strategy. That's simply not. I mean, you look at clubs like even Heart of Midlothian, for example, who've just got the investment from Tony Bloom and everything they're doing. I think they probably have more of a modern long-term football strategy and more in-depth long-term football strategy than Celtic. At the minute, you could even argue Rangers across the city maybe have a better long-term football strategy than what they're trying to achieve with their new investors than Celtic. Peter Lawwell has been at the club for a number of years now, and like you say, that answer he gave in the recent interview last year after the AGM is probably an answer he would have gave 6 months after he joined the club. So Celtic need to modernise. They need to move with the times. It's absolutely critical, because football is as well as it's an ever-changing game on the park in terms of tactics and the way you have to go about your business on the pitch. Off the park, it's an ever-changing game as well, and you need to move with that if you want to. Well, I think Celtic have been lucky in the sense that Rangers have been very poor and disorganised over the past number of years, so they've been able to stay ahead of them because even though they've not modernised. But if Rangers manage to get their act together over the next couple of years, if Celtic don't modernise, then they could be left in the shadows, and that's simply the custodians of the club cannot let that happen.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about kind of clubs around Europe having more progressive strategies. I think even if you look at Kairat Almaty now, I'm not saying they're a fantastic football team. The fact is they're in the Champions League, but they've been building towards this moment for the last decade. I spoke to the former technical director of the Kazakh Football Federation. I don't know if anyone's seen that video, but those who have will know that he was talking about this kind of long-term build-up to this moment of really investing in youth academies. And actually the coach that they have in charge now was the coach of the head coach of their youth academy for a number of years, and helped develop some of the players that are now coming through. And obviously they kind of struck big with this Dastan Satpayev deal, etc. I'm not saying Kairat Almaty are the model, but everyone, I'm just showing it as an example that other clubs at various levels, regardless of what you think of their current football team, do have these long-term visions that are enacted more successfully in the Celtic at the moment. I look at a team like Feyenoord, I discussed it the other day, but they have a very aggressive trading model. You look at a team like Red Star Belgrade, I think they've been investing a lot in their youth systems and stuff over the last few years as well. These are teams Celtic are playing coming up, everyone. That's why we're bringing teams like that up. Kairat did a job on Celtic. Feyenoord will be a difficult game. Red Star Belgrade will be a difficult game. These are the clubs that Celtic are competing with. Feyenoord are a club who won the European Cup once. Red Star Belgrade are a club that won the European Cup once. These are historic sides, and everyone takes pride in their history, but more than just taking pride in your history, it's about functioning and moving forward progressively for the current supporter base, and I think that is so key. I'm just going to bring in some comments here. William O'Toole, good question here. What would be a start to fixing our transfer problems? A director of football or an audit of all departments to be published, fully costed, and a timetable for implementation. I think the latter part of that is ambitious. I don't think Celtic will do that. We know Celtic have flirted with this idea of a director of football in the past. I've gone on the record and saying I think Celtic need a fully functioning sporting director that has some sort of executive power. I think this kind of current situation, Josh, which seems to be identify players and then run it past Michael Nicholson and Desmond, I don't think is particularly fit for purpose as it stands. We need more footballing expertise in the Celtic building, I think, beyond Brendan Rodgers, beyond Paul Disdale. It needs to be someone who's trusted with a budget and can properly stock the Celtic squad up.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the director of football, whoever that may be, deserves a lot of power at the football club to do deals, to do business, to speak to other clubs, communicate with them, and you don't leave that to a CEO and Michael Nicholson, who doesn't have a lot of footballing experience, and run things past Dermot Desmond, who doesn't, although he's been a major shareholder in Celtic for a number of years, doesn't have a lot of experience in football business. He's more of a businessman himself. So that's something that needs to happen. And yet again, it goes back to this whole argument about what other clubs are doing in modern football. Most every side has a sporting director who has the executive power to carry out the transfer dealings. So I think if there's going to be a change in one thing, that is especially what needs to happen. And there obviously, if that happens, there needs to be a greater urgency about doing deals and doing business early, not going for your number one target, Kasper Dolberg, in the last number of days of the transfer window. So yeah, I think that's just a couple of things that could be changed.
Yeah, Martin saying, this is a good point as well, the argument that money isn't given because the manager is leaving shows an archaic footballing strategy. A director of football is required a strategy in place no matter who the manager is. And again, I'm just continuously coming round to the idea. I fully agree with Martin, so I'm not slagging Martin's comment, but that's surely like a basic principle of what Celtic should be. Like that's not an advanced footballing thought in this, in this age of football. I think most clubs in the Premier League have some sort of director of football in place. This seems to be quite a kind of baseline thing in football now that Celtic just don't seem to do because the apparent whim of, and I've said before, we did a whole video on Dermot Desmond and I laid out, the strength that Dermot Desmond gives Celtic is stability, but there's a clear inflexibility of thinking here that Celtic are rapidly being left behind, I think, by clubs across the board, and I think Martin's comment kind of sums it up. Just because Brendan Rodgers is leaving next summer, that doesn't mean that your entire transfer outlook freezes for a year. That's absurd, surely.
Yeah, because the next manager that comes along, you never know, might only be at Celtic for 2 seasons, like Ange Postecoglou was, and then he's away, and then your whole strategy starts again, if that's how you're going about your business. So there needs to be a long-term strategy where you have a director of football in place who, regardless of the manager, there's a strategy there in terms of what you're doing with the squad you're building. Obviously, the manager has some element of power in modern football, or the head coach, as it might be said. But yeah, you need to have that long-term stability in terms of a director of football in the footballing department who knows what they're doing over a number of years, and not backing Brendan Rodgers because he's leaving next summer. It just doesn't make sense.
Everyone, again, it's one of those shows where we've talked at length about the issues, but we don't have solutions because we obviously are not in the picture at Celtic, and I'm not presuming that we should be. But I'm just saying, like, the people in charge don't seem to be communicating any of this, and so we're stuck in this limbo of talking about the issues and not knowing whether Celtic are actually going to move forward with any of this. What I think is really clear is that there's been a really strong unified message from across the Celtic support this week. And I think that's powerful. I think what's most powerful about it for me is that it's not just people who talk about Celtic all the time that are raising these issues. You know, it's the grassroots of the sport, as I mentioned the other night on the show I did with Hamish. It's the Celtic supporters clubs who are going to away games consistently every week. It's the fan groups that put their own time, money and effort into everything, into following Celtic and making Celtic a better experience to follow on a weekly basis. And that's what's key for me. I think the fact that so many Celtic supporters clubs have signed up to that message is a really strong straw that it's something that Celtic cannot ignore. If it was just a list of podcasters and, you know, the Green Brigade, then that would be one thing. It's really important that it engages the wider Celtic support, and I think that's what was so strong about the open letter. And like, I think we've kind of, and the statement hints at it here, and the open letter hints at it here, that there needs to be a transparent dialogue across the support, and it says here, not confined to carefully selected representatives behind closed doors. I believe that's in reference to a meeting that's said to be happening at Celtic Park today between Michael Nicholson and a couple of the Celtic supporters associations or kind of affiliations. I'm not exactly sure which groups it is that he's said to be meeting, but I think the chat is that he is meeting them. But that is it's behind closed doors. It's not something the wider support have access to or will maybe even ever hear about. And again, I don't think that's the right strategy to engage with Celtic in 2020, Celtic fans in 2025 either. So I guess it all rumbles on, Josh. And it will, and this is the thing with the international break going on as well. This will rumble on. This isn't going away anytime soon.
Yeah, unless Celtic address it over the next week. They've got 9 days until Celtic are back in action. They've got 9 days to answer it before things might get even more toxic in the stands away at Kilmarnock. Not towards the team, not towards the manager, but towards the higher ups of the club. And the Celtic supporters will back the team and the manager to the hill between now and the end of the season. But it's quite clear that there needs to be some form of address to that letter, particularly when, like we say, the number of people that have signed it, they must do it in the next week.
Yeah, the chat's informed me and reminded me that this is actually also the anniversary of John Thompson's death. Of course, the former Celtic goalkeeper who tragically passed away in 1931, I think it was. That was a story that was well drilled into me as a young Celtic supporter growing up. Just the idea of someone giving their life for the Celtic cause and giving everything to Celtic, and immensely talented at the time. He was only 22, I think, when he passed away. So, yeah, important to remember figures like that in Celtic's history, undoubtedly. So thanks to the chat for reminding me of that and being able to communicate that. That is a story that does run deep within me, and sure, a lot of Celtic supporters. So, God rest John Thompson, of course. Anything else you want to kind of cover today, Josh, before we go? Again, the Scotland game tonight, etc. But it's really just the countdown to seeing what kind of, Celtic unit we see against Kilmarnock, of course. I mean, there's chat about potential formation changes, what personnel is Brendan Rodgers going to use, how does Brendan Rodgers get a spark out of these players? This Kilmarnock game is a massive game now, and there's kind of lots of these subplots that are very interesting to note regarding it.
Yeah, the team selection will be very interesting. Obviously, we don't really know what's going to happen with Anthony Ralston or Alistair Johnson, so it could be Colby Donovan at right back. Kieran Tierney, obviously concerns over him. Does Cameron Carter-Vickers get risked on the AstroTurf pitch at Rugby Park? Obviously, you've got a couple of dilemmas in the midfield. Do you give Kelechi Iheanacho his debut? Is he fit enough to play? Balikwisha, Tuneke. I think there's a lot of exciting, actually, team selection points going into the game next Sunday, so I'm very intrigued to see what the manager does. Obviously, 3 points are going to be the objective. The gap could be cut to 3 points going into the game. Obviously, if Rangers managed to beat Heart of Midlothian the day before, so a wee bit of pressure on Celtic going to Rugby Park. So yeah, it'll be their last league game for a fortnight, because they'll have the Partick Thistle game in between. Then they go to Red Star to take on Belgrade there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It can't come quick enough, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of the international breaks. I'll watch Scotland tonight, of course, but no Celtic representatives in the Scotland team. I'm not very confident for Scotland tonight, though, if I'm being brutally honest.
Just on to Nekte. I think he is on Tunisia international duty. He wasn't in their squad last night, but I think it's because he arrived at their international camp later because of his move to Celtic. So I think that's what all that was, everyone, if you're wondering about that. So I think Nekte, I think they have a match early next week, and then he'll be back to, we'll be back to seeing what he can offer in a potential debut at Rugby Park. I'm interested in Nekte. I've said before, I think he's going to be an eye-catching player. I think he has a high volume of dribbling and trickery in his arsenal, so I'm looking forward to that, at least. I'm always looking forward to seeing new players in action. I've been whittering on for a while now, so we will wrap this up, everyone. Again, I really appreciate everyone in the live chat today. I'm seeing all your messages, and we do appreciate you. And we do have stuff coming up on the website and the YouTube channel. We'll be back on Monday, I think. I don't think we'll have any videos out over the weekend, but we do have a lot going up on the website. I've got Alan Morrison looking at a potential formation change at Celtic later today. I think tomorrow I've got a big deep dive into all of this stuff around the fans, what it could mean financially for Celtic, and why the Celtic board need to take action and can't be complacent on this issue. I've got a big feature on that going up tomorrow. I think on Sunday we've got a closer look at Tenekte and Heanacho and how their careers have gone over the last couple of years. And then on Monday we're doing full comparison of the squads to last year and asking the question, is this Celtic squad fit for purpose? And trying to get to the bottom of that. So we've got lots coming up on the website, lots coming up on the channel next week. We really appreciate your support as always. Josh, thank you for joining me today as well. I hope you have a great weekend. Have a great weekend, everyone in the live chat. Have a great weekend below, and we'll see you again next time on the Celtic Way.